I go by the name Alice, leading a seemingly ordinary life as a housewife. My husband John is an exceptionally kind partner, and our relationship has been free of any disagreements. It's not to boast, but he truly is the ideal companion. Currently residing in an apartment close to John's parents' house, this decision was intentional. With both my parents no longer with us, we wanted to be nearby in case of the birth of our child or any unforeseen issues. Additionally, considering the potential future care needs of John's parents, I saw the practicality of our living arrangement. However, a strange occurrence started to unfold during our dinner gatherings with John's parents. Mysterious stomach pains plagued me, leading me to initially avoid meals at John's house. Unfortunately, circumstances forced me to attend, and that's when an unexpected event transpired, revealing a shocking revelation about my mother-in-law's actions, shedding light on the source of my inexplicable pain. Before these unsettling events, John and I had opted out of a traditional wedding ceremony. I wasn't keen on being the center of attention, and we believed redirecting funds towards travel and hobbies made more sense than a lavish ceremony. Nevertheless, my mother-in-law, who conducted free cooking classes as a hobby, proposed a dinner party to celebrate our marriage. Excited to showcase her culinary skills, she warmly welcomed John but exhibited a noticeable coldness toward me. Despite the confusion, the dinner party proceeded with a variety of exquisite dishes prepared by her, momentarily overshadowing the earlier sense of unwelcome. Expressing gratitude for the delightful meals, I thought the initial discomfort might have been a misunderstanding. However, that night, severe stomach pain struck suddenly, leading to a rushed visit to the emergency room. Despite inconclusive diagnosis due to the absence of a specialist, my condition stabilized after receiving IV treatment for 2 hours. The cause of my distress, possibly linked to expired bread consumed earlier, remained a mystery. After returning home with John, I found myself grappling with unexplained stomach pain every time I dined at my in-laws' place following a particular incident. Seeking advice, I discussed this issue over lunch with a long-lost friend. She suggested, "Could it be that simply visiting your husband's house is causing you stress?" Surprisingly, she had experienced a similar situation, falling ill due to harassment from her mother-in-law. After relocating to a new apartment further away, her health improved significantly. Although I hadn't initially considered visits to my in-laws as a source of stress, my friend's advice made me ponder if there was an underlying unease in my heart. Concerned about my recurring illnesses, my husband, who had initially brushed off the matter, began to take it seriously. Consequently, he suggested that we temporarily halt our visits to my in-laws. While the exact cause remained elusive, my husband suspected his mother's cooking, given my consistent bouts of illness after meals there. According to him, his mother often expressed loneliness and a desire for shared meals, but he had declined due to his worry for my health. Despite our decision to refrain from visiting, a new challenge emerged. My brother-in-law was scheduled to visit our parents for his wedding greetings, and a family dinner was arranged. Reluctantly, my husband explained, "I can't decline this time, as my brother is going to our parents' place. We're expected to participate in the dinner meeting with the entire family." Despite my inclination to avoid a direct encounter with my mother-in-law, I couldn't neglect the familial obligation tied to my brother-in-law and his wife. Deciding to participate in the family dinner, little did anyone anticipate the ensuing commotion it would cause. Despite my husband's concern for my health, he advised me, "Alice, you don't have to eat the meals today." As we arrived at the dinner meeting, my mother-in-law greeted us with her usual warm smile, particularly directed at my husband. However, I couldn't help but sense an even colder attitude towards me compared to before. Upon entering the room, my brother-in-law and his wife were engaged in a pleasant conversation with my father-in-law. My mother-in-law's homemade dishes were beautifully presented on the table, emitting an enticing aroma that stirred my appetite. The mystery persisted. Why did I fall ill after consuming these seemingly delicious meals? No matter how I pondered, the reason eluded me. Seated at the table, my mother-in-law promptly urged me to start eating. Swiftly, my husband intervened, stating that I wasn't feeling well. However, she seemed to dismiss my condition as a minor issue, offering me a dish with a wordless smile, almost challenging me to eat. Feeling at a loss for words, my brother-in-law came to my defense, expressing gratitude for my presence despite my illness. He suggested it was sufficient to exchange greetings and encouraged me to go home and rest if needed. Informed in advance by my husband, he and his wife stood by my side. Ignoring their son's words, my mother-in-law insisted on packaging the dish in a Tupperware for me to try later. Wondering why she was so insistent on my eating, I nodded to avoid upsetting her. As she went to the kitchen to fetch the Tupperware, a loud clatter interrupted the scene. All eyes turned to my father-in-law, who was clutching his stomach in pain despite not having started his meal. In a panic, my mother-in-law asked what happened, and he, in agony, replied, "My stomach hurts so much I can't bear it." The cause of his suffering remained unclear, adding another layer of tension to the already tumultuous dinner. I had only taken a few nibbles from the kitchen before the gathering, and suddenly my father-in-law collapsed weakly. Disbelief struck me as my mother-in-law, panicked, exclaimed, "You must be joking. That was something I made to feed Alice." "Wait, this is not the time to think about that. Call an ambulance." Without hesitation, she dialed for an ambulance and rushed to the hospital with my father-in-law. We all stood frozen, staring, processing the unexpected turn of events. However, her earlier words lingered in my mind, the revelation that what my father-in-law had snacked on was intended for me. It implied there might be something wrong with that particular dish. Driven by concern, I headed to the kitchen, a place my mother-in-law had always kept me away from. There, I discovered something that left me in shock, finally understanding why I would fall ill and why my father-in-law had collapsed. The realization that she would do something like this struck me as utterly absurd. Reeling from the revelation, I knew I had to decide how to handle this betrayal. Forgiveness wasn't an option. Revenge became a necessity. Each of us drove to the hospital where my father-in-law was taken. After checking in at the reception, we headed straight for the patient room. Inside, we could hear two voices, one unmistakably my mother-in-law's, and the other likely a male doctor. She was being questioned about what had happened. "I'm telling you, I don't know anything. He just suddenly collapsed while we were all enjoying the meals," my mother-in-law insisted. The doctor probed further, asking if he had consumed anything rotten or expired. Evading the questions, my mother-in-law continued to deny any knowledge. Summoning courage, I took a deep breath and knocked on the hospital room door. Flustered, my mother-in-law greeted us. "Oh, Alice and John, you're here too. Your father is okay. Please go home and enjoy dinner with the four of you." However, her somewhat flustered manner and attempt to close the door heightened my suspicions. I seized the moment and asserted, "No, I'd like to talk to you for a bit." Behind me, my husband silently projected his presence, while my brother-in-law and his wife sent sharp, cold glances. Faced with this collective insistence, my mother-in-law couldn't refuse and reluctantly said, "Okay." Allowing us into the room, my father-in-law's facial color appeared to be returning, showing signs of stability. However, the exact cause remained undetermined. Though he was still conscious when brought to the hospital, he had been frequently using the bathroom. The doctor explained that he eventually lost consciousness due to dehydration. Attempting to offer an excuse, my mother-in-law forced a smile, saying, "Well, your father is getting old, and he drinks beer every day." Her attempt at justification seemed feeble, and realizing that neither the doctor nor we were convinced, she fell silent, closing her mouth. I looked at my mother-in-law with a stern gaze, took evidence out of my bag, and presented it to her. As she observed the contents, her eyes widened, and she broke into a cold sweat, visibly confused. "Mother-in-law, isn't this a laxative? I found some powdered laxatives in the kitchen. What's this about?" I inquired calmly, but she remained silent. The doctor, examining the laxatives, seemed to understand. Oh, that would make sense if he had diarrhea without being food poisoned. Generally, intake of laxatives is a possibility, he explained. Subsequent detailed examinations revealed that my father-in-law had indeed ingested a significant amount of laxatives. The final diagnosis pointed to the laxatives making his intestines hyperactive, causing repeated abdominal pain, diarrhea, and ultimately dehydration. Cornered and unable to make excuses any longer, my mother-in-law hesitated before finally saying, "Wait. At first, I only expected Alice to get a little sick. But because Alice was fine, I gradually increased the amount of laxatives." The confession laid bare the motive for her actions, a sense of loss over her perceived detachment of her beloved eldest son from her. Starting with a small amount of laxatives out of spite, she admitted to progressively escalating the dosage, ultimately reaching a point where it caused a person to collapse. My surprise was impossible to conceal as I confronted my mother-in-law, stating, "What you've done is just crazy. You may not know this, but I've been to the hospital multiple times for IVs due to unexplained symptoms. Despite this, I can't understand why you would attempt to mix in such a huge amount of laxatives." Unable to find room for argument after having her mistake pointed out, my mother-in-law hung her head in frustration. A series of criticisms followed from her sons. "Mom, no matter the circumstances, this can't be forgiven. It just so happens that Alice didn't respond that sensitively to the laxatives. But what you've done is the same as a crime," my husband exclaimed. His words were echoed by my brother-in-law, who expressed, "I thought it was unthinkable, but were you trying to do the same thing to my wife? Thinking about it that way is really scary." He pulled his wife closer, throwing a stern gaze at his mother. The doctor intervened, emphasizing, "Medication should be used in the proper amounts and methods, as your son said. Luckily, your daughter-in-law's symptoms were mild, but your husband had no resistance to laxatives, thus resulting in this severe reaction." Unable to bear the criticism, my mother-in-law, despite her age, began to cry like a small child. From the bed, a voice was heard, my father-in-law, who had regained consciousness. He exclaimed, "How could you do such a terrible thing?" Crying, my mother-in-law grasped his hand, apologizing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you." However, he forcefully shook off her hand. Frozen in place, shocked by the unfolding events, my mother-in-law witnessed my father-in-law letting out a deep sigh. He continued, "Even if you didn't intend to hurt me, it's a fact that you've caused Alice to suffer a lot. That's not right. It's a shameful act as a human being." In response to his words, my mother-in-law begged for forgiveness, clinging to him. She turned to me, apologizing for her actions and pledging never to repeat such behavior. Seeking my forgiveness, she expressed hope that my husband and the boys would also be convinced. Witnessing this emotional scene, I found myself torn between the desire for retribution and the possibility of forgiveness. I cynically thought it must be a performance, and she wasn't genuinely remorseful about what she had done to me, so I smirked. "Ah, what are you talking about? I'm not even considering forgiving you now after all I've been through," I asserted. In solidarity, my husband stood beside me and added, "Mother, stay away from Alice. I can no longer think of someone who hurt my beloved wife as family." The declaration stunned my mother-in-law, causing her to collapse to her knees, rejected as family by her own son. Observing the scene, my brother-in-law nodded and stated firmly, "I can't imagine living with someone who could potentially harm my wife. I have no intention of you being my family anymore." His words echoed a unanimous sentiment against her. As my mother-in-law continued to beg for forgiveness, broken down in tears, no one uttered a word. Everyone simply looked down at her, realizing that her selfish jealousy had caused this situation. Desperate for support, she turned to my father-in-law, seemingly forgetting he had already rejected her. Sobbing, she implored, "What about you? You won't abandon me, your wife, will you?" However, my father-in-law retorted, "What of it? I can't stay with someone who commits such inhumane acts anymore. I want a divorce." Crushed by his words, My mother-in-law was left devastated. Agreeing with my husband's suggestion to let my father-in-law rest, we bid farewell to him and exited the hospital room. While waiting for my husband to retrieve the car at the entrance, my mother-in-law, panting, suddenly ran towards us. "Begging you, Alice, please forgive me," she pleaded. Looking at her tear-streaked and snotty face, I responded, "I have no reason to risk my life to be with you, mother-in-law. If I forgive you now, I don't think it will truly be for your benefit." I responded coldly to my mother-in-law, and just as I finished speaking, my husband arrived in the car. We got in, and through the window, I told my mother-in-law, "This is goodbye. We will likely never meet again. Take care." Her response to my cold words was silence. She watched us leave, her hand brushing against her sleeve, murmuring something as if in prayer while looking up at the sky. True to my father-in-law's declaration, he divorced and moved out. In the aftermath, my husband and brother-in-law severed ties with their mother. Previously, my father-in-law had been the leaseholder and paid the rent for the apartment. However, since he left after the divorce, I had to start paying the rent myself. My mother-in-law, having been a housewife all her life, struggled to figure out how to earn a living. Despite trying to make ends meet with the money she received from the property division in the divorce, it quickly ran out. Attempts to charge for her cooking classes and outreach for various work opportunities failed, with the news of the incident spreading and leaving her with no students. Consequently, she couldn't pay the rent, was evicted from her home, and only then did she grasp the harshness of reality. Now homeless, my mother-in-law began looking for work, facing the difficulties of life without a place to live. This, as people say, is karma. Shortly after being released from my unexplained illness, I found out that I was pregnant. My husband and father-in-law, despite the divorce, remained in contact. Upon hearing about my pregnancy, my father-in-law was overjoyed, even more so than we were. He had already prepared a stroller and car seat for us, a gesture that truly felt like a blessing. Discovering a playful side to my previously silent father-in-law, I am filled with joy as a family member. What's more, my brother-in-law and his wife had twins, unexpectedly expanding our family. Our lives became more lively, and I am genuinely looking forward to our new life with our new family members and the fresh days ahead. That's why I requested you to settle the debt. The burden my husband suddenly imposed on me, vanishing without a trace. No matter how persistently I tried to reach him, there was absolute silence. Now, I'm left wondering what to do, facing an insurmountable debt. Fortunately, in my moments of despair, there was someone by my side offering encouragement. My dear daughter. "Mom, cheer up," echoed the soothing voice of my beloved daughter. My name is Kate, 35 years old, juggling part-time work and homemaking. My husband, Rogan, and I, along with our daughter, make up our family of 3. I met Rogan at a mixer, a casual event I attended just to fill the numbers. Despite my nervousness, Rogan took the initiative to strike up a conversation, effortlessly lightening the atmosphere. Before long, we connected and decided to exchange contact information. As our communication deepened, a special bond blossomed between us. Unexpectedly, we started dating, a twist I shared with my older sister Talia after our first date. To my surprise, Talia burst into laughter, commenting, "I never thought you'd choose a boyfriend from a mixer." She assumed I'd find someone through work. Talia, enjoying her single life, didn't seem eager for a relationship. Fast forward a few years, and Rogan and I got married. Talia congratulated us on our new life together. Our early days of marriage were filled with joy. Rogan's proposal and our move to a new apartment marked the beginning of our life as a married couple. Although our different work hours meant we seldom returned home together, we cherished the time spent dining, sleeping, and enjoying our days off together. This routine brought a new joy to our lives, and a few months later, we were blessed with the birth of our adorable daughter, Rhea. The emotional impact of Rhea's birth was profound, and I felt like I had found true happiness. Our family showered us with congratulatory gifts, celebrating this new addition. I resigned from my job to dedicate myself fully to my family, and Rogan, always considerate, helped with housework and childcare. However, a few years later, regret began to seep into my heart. Rogan, after resigning from his job due to issues with a new superior, failed to communicate this significant decision to me beforehand. While I empathize with the challenges he faced at work, the abruptness of his resignation left me concerned, especially since our family relied on his income. The absence of any discussion or consultation added to my distress. That was so sudden. Have you already thought about your next job? I questioned him, grappling with the unforeseen turn of events. Yeah, don't worry. I'll figure something out. Rogan's vague response failed to ease my concerns. However, it seemed the only option now was to trust him. Fortunately, Rogan quickly secured a new job, a relief for both of us. I also considered working, but since Rhea is still young, I want to be there for her at home. Is everything okay at the new workplace? Have you settled in? I inquired, attempting to gauge his well-being. Yeah, somehow. Did something happen? Are you not getting along with your boss or colleagues? I persisted. I told you I'm fine. Don't worry too much. Look, I'll take care of Rhea, so you go and take a bath. Really, thank you, he responded. Though he seemed different than usual, I refrained from prying further and handed Rhea to him before heading to the bath. A few days later, Rogan returned home looking dejected. As I tried to inquire about what had happened, memories of his abrupt resignation flashed through my mind. Did he quit his job again within such a short period? I quit my job. I just couldn't get along with the people there. I couldn't stand being constantly directed by someone much younger than me. I just couldn't bear it anymore, he explained. I see, but we'll get through this. We'll find another job. I'll help in any way I can. Suddenly, Rogan's expression changed, and he raised his voice at me. Hey, what's with that look? You don't like that I quit? You're able to eat because I work. You just stay at home and you're acting all high and mighty. After throwing his bag onto the living room table, he continued, Shut up. Just be quiet. Unable to contain his anger, Rogan grabbed a whiskey from the fridge and downed it in one gulp. I had never seen him this angry before. I felt terrified at that moment. Despite my gratitude towards him and efforts to be supportive, an extremely angry Rogan shouted at me for a while, then slumped down on the sofa looking grumpy. I was so shocked that all I could do was accept his words, and this incident created a rift in our relationship. Since then, Rogan has been caught in a cycle of finding and quitting jobs, leaving us in uncertainty with many anxious days. I couldn't keep silent any longer. Rogan, can't you be a bit more serious about your job? If you have complaints, then you work and earn money. You rely too much on me, but there's Rhea to consider. So what's your point? Lately, Rogan has been gradually losing interest in Rhea and seems to be avoiding her. When Rhea was born, he took great care of her and was genuinely happy. Observing Rogan now, he felt like a completely different person. No matter how much I pleaded, Rogan showed no interest in continuing his work. Eventually, I decided to entrust Rhea to Talia and started working on my own. I'm really sorry for having to leave her with you. I apologized to Talia. It's okay. Rhea and I will wait together, she reassured me. Rhea, who had just started attending kindergarten, wasn't a major concern. Part of it was because I trusted Talia to take care of her. But Rhea was also remarkably mature and calm for her age. She showed interest in newspapers, read them on her own, and could even write long and somewhat complex sentences. Rhea had a quiet disposition and was exceptionally composed for her age. When she started attending kindergarten, I was concerned about whether she'd be able to make friends and effectively communicate with others besides me. However, it turned out I didn't need to worry. Rhea made many friends in kindergarten and enjoyed her time there. As a parent, that was the most heartwarming thing to witness, given the situation. I felt it would be no problem for me to work outside the home. When I started looking for a job, I found one quicker than expected, and I began working full-time. The pay was better than I had anticipated, and even if Rogan quit his job, our finances would probably stabilize. Thankfully, the work environment was also pleasant, and despite the busy days, I enjoyed working. A few years after I began working, Rogan finally found a stable job. It seemed like he had finally found a workplace that satisfied him. Learning this brought a profound sense of relief. Over time, Rogan's demeanor brightened, and he seemed to return to the man I knew in the early days of our marriage. He became considerate of the challenges I faced juggling work and family, often asking, "Has it been tough? Aren't you tired?" I was a bit taken aback by this transformation. Perhaps job stability had given Rogan peace of mind. Rhea was growing up healthily, and Rogan started acting like a caring father to her once again. Seeing Rhea play joyfully with Rogan always warmed my heart. Still, the thought of returning to the way things were before made me anxious about leaving my job. Therefore, I continued to rely on Talia for childcare. "How's Rhea? Is she looking well?" I would ask Talia. "Don't worry, she's playing happily," she reassured me. If Rhea was doing well, I could be at ease. I probably would continue to depend on Talia. I had been considering treating Talia to something she liked as a token of my appreciation. Several years went by, and Rhea was now in the 3rd grade of elementary school. She attended school every day with great enthusiasm. The family's bond was just like before, harmonious and loving. I wondered what had caused the previous rift between Rogan and me. Our home life felt so stable, almost as if the past problems had been forgotten. Then, one day, Rogan made a suggestion. "Ever think about getting a new car?" I was taken aback. "A new car?" "Yeah, our current car is good, but I think it's reaching the end of its life. If it's becoming a hassle to maintain, indeed the car we were using had been purchased quite a while ago. Over the years, issues increased, and the repair costs started to pile up. You might be right. Maybe we should consider a new car." "Yes, I knew you'd agree. By the way, I've already got some catalogs pulled ready." "Thanks." I didn't expect him to be this eager about replacing the car. I was a bit surprised, but we started looking through the catalogs together. "Rhea, come here. Which car do you want to ride in? Let's decide together." He called Rhea over, and the 3 of us enjoyed flipping through the car catalogs together. However, I couldn't have imagined that this day would mark the beginning of an unexpected turn of events. A few months later, the new car that the 3 of us chose was delivered. The car we bought was a brand new model costing over $155,000. The loan was under my name. Generally, people would expect Rogan's name on the loan, but considering his unstable work history, we were concerned about being rejected. I was determined to work even harder from now on and pay off the loan. I was sure Rogan felt the same way, that's what I believed. But my hopes were shattered in an instant. Rogan stopped coming home. He disappeared along with the newly purchased car. Could it be that Rogan got involved in some kind of trouble? What should I do? At that moment, my cell phone rang. The call was from Rogan. "Hello, Rogan. Where are you? What are you doing?" Out of concern, my voice raised unintentionally. "Hey, calm down. But you disappeared all of a sudden, and the new car is gone. What happened? Did you get caught up in some trouble?" I tried to convey how I had worried every day until then, but Rogan laughed at my concerns and said something unbelievable. "Actually, I found a new lover. She's more important to me than you." "What? What do you mean? Let me be clear." "I've fallen in love with someone else. I've already taken care of the divorce notice. I'd appreciate it if you stopped getting involved." "Wait, divorce? I can't believe this." I was shocked by the mention of a divorce notice. However, I remembered a discussion we had during a big fight a while ago. Submitting the application to the court means that both parties agree to the divorce. I deeply regretted letting my emotions take control at that time. "Oh, by the way, I have a debt. I'm counting on you to repay it." "What? How much debt are we talking about?" "I think $200,000, give or take. I'm leaving all the repayments to you." With those words, Rogan abruptly hung up the phone. I never thought something like this would happen to me. Were all of his kind smiles in the past just lies? As these thoughts crossed my mind, I could feel the strength drain from my body. Mom, what happened? As I slumped to the floor, Raya rushed over, looking concerned. It's okay, honey. Thank you. I tried to put on a brave face, but inside, I was filled with anxiety. How will I manage our life now with such a massive debt looming over us? The thought of the $200,000 made me feel suffocated. On top of that, there was still the car loan to think about. In a state of panic, I decided to check my bank balance, searching everywhere. Closet, drawers, kitchen, bedroom. But my ATM card was nowhere to be found. Frantically, I launched my bank app on my smartphone. And to my horror, the account balance had significantly decreased. I had no memory of withdrawing such an amount, and the only suspect was Rogan. Trying to contact him proved futile, and with my mind going blank, I thought I should focus on earning money. I chose to keep this a secret from Talia and young Riev to avoid unnecessary worry. A few weeks after Rogan disappeared, I lost consciousness at work. Upon waking up, I found myself in a hospital bed, where Talia and Ria revealed they knew about Rogan and my deteriorating health. Raya had overheard Rogan's phone call, and Talia, surprisingly furious, wanted to locate Rogan to make him repay the debt and medical bills. However, Rogan's whereabouts remained unknown. When I was discharged, I fell down, fearing Talia's reprimand for letting her know. Various tests revealed my poor health was due to cancer, still in the early stages with hope for recovery through surgery. Though the surgery went well, returning to work immediately seemed impossible due to mounting medical bills and no savings. During these challenging times, Talia and Ria became my pillars of support. Talia tried to locate Rogan, and when she discovered he was working in the same building, they hatched a plan to get back the car that was under my name. As we prepared to confront Rogan, Talia stopped me, emphasizing the need for a solid plan. Raya reassured me that everything was set up, and a month later, while at Talia's house, a sudden call from Rogan came in. After ignoring it initially, I gathered my courage and answered. In a frantic voice, Rogan pleaded for help, claiming he was about to be arrested. He shared his location and quickly ended the call. Talia and Ria then revealed the turn of events. They had reported the car as stolen, a move aimed at compelling Rogan to confront the consequences. Filled with gratitude, Ria blushed, and the mystery of their plan became clear. I expressed my gratitude to Talia and Ria and hurried to the park where Rogan was waiting. The specified park was surprisingly close to my home, and when we arrived, we found police officers interrogating Rogan about something. After explaining the situation to the officers and having them leave, Rogan ushered us into his car and began narrating the events that led to this. Inside the car, a confident-looking woman named Lily sat boldly in the passenger seat, staring at us with a cold gaze. Rogan questioned why the police came to him, seemingly unaware of the gravity of the situation. Raya confronted Rogan, asking why he left them behind and why he wouldn't pay back the money himself. Rogan, visibly shaken, remained silent. Ria and Talia continued questioning Rogan about his actions and his relationship with Lily. Talia criticized Rogan's irresponsible behavior, constantly changing jobs, and quick temper. Rogan bowed his head in silence, and Lily, visibly irritated, revealed shocking details. Rogan had borrowed $200,000 in his wife's name for expensive luxury gifts for Lily. Raya questioned Lily about her pregnancy, and Talia noticed an inconsistency in the timeline. Lily revealed that the child wasn't Rogan's and admitted to keeping it a secret to avoid further involvement with him. The tension increased, and Talia took charge, threatening to call the police for the criminal acts committed. Ignoring Rogan and Lily's pleas, Talia instructed me to contact the police. Legal actions were taken, and Rogan and Lily faced consequences, including compensation payments, repaying the debt, and child support. Despite attempts to reduce payments through lawyers, A secret recording made by Rhea served as evidence denying their requests. In the end, Ruggin and Lily didn't go to prison but had to shoulder responsibilities. Rhea and I now live with Talia, and the car was safely returned. Rogan is somehow managing the debt, and the presence of Talia and Rhea played a significant role in resolving the situation. Grateful for their support, I look forward to a peaceful life with the two of them, working hard for a better future. If you wish, we can consider divorce, but I'd like to continue living with our son. Despite John berating me extensively, he looked satisfied as he took a deep breath. I pondered how to respond, and our son, who had been waiting in the background, stepped forward. "Dad, if you don't know, let me tell you," our son said, pointing at his father's mistress. His words made me break into a cheeky smile. "My name is Jennifer. I turned 42 this year, currently working as a freelance illustrator. We've been married for 15 years, and we have a son in 8th grade. Throughout our marriage, John has jumped from job to job, not lasting very long. Most of our income comes from my work as I balance housework, raising our child, and my job. Working from home became a necessity as John took sporadic short-term jobs. Despite being a newbie in the freelance world initially, my efforts resulted in a stable income and consistent work. Referrals from former clients led to new projects, and I now illustrate educational magazines and brochures. With David growing up, I managed to work from home and go out for work a few times a week. The three of us lived harmoniously, but John's lack of direction troubled me. At 44, he seemed content with his aimless life, rarely working full-time. Despite having free time, he didn't contribute much to housework or child raising. John's disinterest in our son David, who was entering his challenging teenage years, frustrated me. David, although not very talkative, occasionally helped with chores without being asked. However, John showed no interest in our son and rarely assisted with household responsibilities. Lately, John had been coming home late more often, and I couldn't shake off my unease and frustration. Even on days when he claimed to be working, I suspected he might be doing something else. His sudden interest in picking up and dropping off David at his basketball club raised suspicions, as it contradicted our household rule of always having a parent handle these tasks. While I appreciated the help, something felt off, and my suspicions started to crystallize over the past few months. As I passed by the place where David goes, I decided to take a different route home for a change of scenery. While shopping near David's facility, I unexpectedly spotted John, who wasn't supposed to be there. He had claimed he'd be late tonight due to out-of-town work. To my surprise, he was chatting happily with a woman who appeared to be one of the staff members from the basketball facility. A sense of unease washed over me as I observed the two of them. The woman noticed me and tilted her head, asking, "Excuse me, are you David's mom?" I reluctantly confirmed, and she thanked me for my son being in her care. Awkwardly nodding, I engaged in small talk with her, curious about her role at the facility. Ignoring my husband, who seemed rigid and tense, I attempted to gather information. The woman introduced herself as Jessica, but I couldn't help but wonder why she didn't provide more details about her role with David. Ignoring my puzzled expression, my husband seemed eager to end their conversation. On the way home, we didn't speak, and he deliberately avoided eye contact, appearing distant. His recent late returns and eagerness to handle drop-offs and pickups, combined with his strange behavior after being spotted, fueled my suspicions. I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica had something to do with it. As we walked home, I wondered if he was having an affair with this younger woman. In my heart, I sensed a change since he began doing the drop-offs and pickups. He had become noticeably distant, and when I inquired about his behavior, our son responded curtly, displaying annoyance. Chasing after our reluctant son and forcing him to the facility every day felt wrong. My suspicions grew, and soon they were confirmed. One day, as I casually dropped by, Jessica found excuses to visit our home more frequently. While she mentioned our son, it became clear that it was just a pretext. She always appeared when my husband was home, not me or our son. Watching them cheerfully converse in the living room, I was certain of John's infidelity. A month after noticing odd behavior, my husband began coming home later and occasionally leaving for days. When I jokingly remarked about his late return, suggesting he spare me the cheating, he abruptly stood up and glared at me. "Just stick to your work. I'm taking care of David, so don't pry into it unnecessarily," he retorted before leaving the living room with a sigh. I seethed with anger at being told as if he was handling everything, when in reality, he had left all the housework and the responsibility of taking care of David to me. My frustration surfaced during one of our petty disputes, and David, who had been silently observing, finally spoke up. "What's the matter, Mom?" David questioned, having noticed the tension. Trying to downplay it, I asked about him and why he was up at that hour. David, stepping out of his room, stared at me before hesitantly sharing his observations about a female staff member he suspected to be his father's mistress. According to David, this woman, Jessica, would frequently approach him at the facility, annoying him with her clinginess. He felt frustrated that she had started coming to our house, a sentiment I shared. It was evident that my son disliked having someone from his basketball club imposing on our home, providing me with a sense of relief. However, the problem persisted. Returning home from a client meeting, I heard cheerful conversation in the living room, the voices of John and Jessica. David was noticeably absent, holed up in his room. Upon entering the living room, both John and Jessica turned their eyes toward me. Jessica, with unwavering confidence, greeted me. "Welcome back, David's mom." I ran into John, so he invited me in, Jessica said, addressing my husband by his name, a fact that deeply unsettled me. Attempting sarcasm, I inquired about her frequent meetings with John, to which she responded with a smug face, claiming it was part of her job. Her audacity continued as she pointed out the deficiencies in my housekeeping, expressing that the house felt cozy but lacked thorough cleaning. My husband didn't rebuff her comments and even chuckled along, seemingly siding with Jessica. Although I worked from home, I felt self-conscious about not keeping up with housework. However, if he contributed more to chores and childcare, it wouldn't be an issue. Feeling mocked and ridiculed, unable to bear the tension, I hastily left the living room for the bedroom, still holding my belongings. Frustration, sadness, and embarrassment overwhelmed me. I feared that Jessica might eventually take over my place in the family. Even after that encounter, my husband and Jessica continued their outings, displaying their relationship in front of me, leaving me speechless. I later learned from others that they often met under the guise of discussing my son's education, further deepening my sense of betrayal. Realizing the need for evidence during my husband's frequent absences, I embarked on a search that uncovered undeniable proof of his infidelity. Despite his claims that we couldn't afford gifts for birthdays or anniversaries, I stumbled upon receipts from motels, upscale restaurants, and high-end watches and jewelry in his coat pocket. Even places he insisted were beyond our financial reach had receipts, suggesting he frequented them with his mistress, not his wife. While the pain of his actions cut deep, I maintained composure and continued accumulating evidence of his affairs. Though divorce crossed my mind, I resolved to endure until David graduated from high school. Yet I vowed to gather sufficient evidence to secure a favorable position if the time for separation came. The question lingered. Where was the money for his affair coming from? As I pondered, I remembered our house's savings account for my son's college fund. A chill ran down my spine as I checked the transactions, revealing substantial withdrawals over the past few months. Shockingly, the balance had significantly decreased. The money meant for our son's education was being used for his selfish needs. The betrayal against our child overshadowed the betrayal against me as his wife. Suppressing my anger, I chose to act normal, not wanting our impressionable son to sense the brewing storm. I carried the burdens alone, trying not to burden our son who was studying diligently. However, stress took its toll, leading to small mistakes in household chores and at work. Even longtime client Mrs. Smith noticed my worn-out state, expressing concern and offering comfort. While I struggled, my husband reveled in his affair, seemingly more relaxed without my interference. Eventually, our son, David, would inevitably confront the issues within our family. Observing my downtrodden demeanor, David silently approached to help with household tasks. "I kind of know what's going on, huh?" he said, folding laundry. "Do whatever you want to do, Mom. You don't have to worry about me." His thoughtful actions, though sparing in words, warmed my heart and intensified my anger toward the traitor who touched the money reserved for our son's future. Retribution for this betrayal became a necessity. Contemplating whether to reach out to the person who had promised support, I weighed the options before me. With clenched fists, I vowed vengeance on my husband and his mistress. One evening, he suddenly announced a week-long work trip for training in another state. However, skepticism arose. The restaurant chain he worked for operated solely within our state, with no offices outside. His earlier boast about the job's perks included not having to relocate out of state. When my son casually mentioned a staff member from his club taking a week off, my husband's startled expression raised suspicions. Despite his initial pride in discussing the intense training, he grew silent and stared anxiously at his smartphone. Since confirming his infidelity, I had been monitoring both him and Jessica. A private investigator revealed that Jessica, working at the basketball facility, also had a week off. Aware that their business trip was a cover for a romantic getaway, I refrained from catching them red-handed, opting for a more strategic plan. Having planned something since discovering their intentions, I coordinated with my son, who was now on board. On the day of their trip, I bid farewell to my unsuspecting husband. My son and I, aided by relatives, began cleaning and packing. The plan was to move out while he was away and stay elsewhere until finding a new home. Supported by relatives angered by his actions yet concerned for David. To prevent my husband's access to our savings account, I transferred the remaining money to my personal account. While making preparations, I couldn't leave his belongings behind and decided to send them to a specific location with Mrs. Smith's consent. A few days after moving, my phone rang with my husband in a panic, requesting money during his supposed training. Declining, I confronted him about the account he usually withdrew from. The frantic voice of Jessica in the background signaled their financial desperation. The next day, my son and I headed to a specific location, a magnificent mansion with a well-maintained garden. Inside, we found my cheating husband and his mistress, sitting on the floor, apologizing to Mrs. Smith. She, with a stern expression, was not just a longtime client, but also the principal of the middle school attended by my son, forging a close relationship over the years. We confide in each other with our personal troubles. I'm deeply sorry for the trouble caused by my husband. In truth, it's my daughter's fault that all of this happened. It turned out that Jessica, who was on a trip with my husband, was questioned by her parents about a package she received at home and had no choice but to return immediately. Naturally, she insisted that my husband accompany her. Upon hearing Mrs. Smith's words, my husband began to shake in fear. Mrs. Smith had always been concerned about my declining health after learning about John's affair. When I finally confided in her about the affair and she discovered that the mistress was her daughter, she was utterly devastated. Despite this, Mrs. Smith wanted to make amends for her daughter's actions and had been cooperating with me ever since. Pointing at the piles of boxes, she sternly reprimanded her daughter, expressing her disappointment. "You should be ashamed of yourself for always wanting what isn't yours." Mrs. Smith scolded her daughter sternly. Her daughter attempted to defend herself, claiming it was a misunderstanding, but Mrs. Smith wouldn't hear it. She insisted on an apology, promising consequences for her daughter's actions. Ignoring Jessica's hysterics, I turned my attention to my silent husband standing beside her. "Don't you have something to say to me?" I asked sharply, prompting David, who had been standing behind me, to step forward. "She's not a regular staff there, just an intern at the club," David interjected firmly, addressing Jessica directly. "And don't you ever try to get all chummy with me again. Always flirting with men. It's disgusting." As my son spoke, it became clear that Jessica hadn't been officially hired at the club. contrary to my husband's belief. He had thought she was experienced in student education or activities, which was laughable considering her actual status. Their exchange revealed hidden truths, and as I looked at the stunned Jessica, it seemed that they both had their secrets. Before leaving, I felt compelled to offer Jessica a piece of advice. Did you know that I pay for the rent, living expenses, and even David's tuition fees? This man, John, has been working odd jobs for years. You think he's okay? Jen, with a face drained of color, attempted to interject, but it was too late. Jessica was so shocked by the revelation that she collapsed on the spot. From what I could tell, John had been acting as if he had plenty of money to spare, hiding the fact that I was the breadwinner of the family to save face in Jessica's eyes. I seemed like a lazy bum who neither worked nor took care of household chores properly. Mrs. Smith was left devastated, facing the harsh reality presented by my husband and Jessica. After David and I happily returned home, it appeared that John was kicked out of Mrs. Smith's house. Looking defeated with Jessica and a load of stuff, months passed since the move. On Mrs. Smith's advice, I decided to leave my divorce process to a competent lawyer. Thanks to professional assistance, all the complicated procedures went smoothly, bringing me relief. I heard that the savings I had set aside for David's education could also be added to the claim as child support. As for Jessica, rumors spread quickly at the basketball club about her affair with a student's parent, leading to her dismissal from the job. Seeking help from her parents, Jessica found Mrs. Smith unwilling to assist, leaving her lost and confused. Despising a man without money, she spat out words of disdain and abandoned John. Despite John's attempts at reconciliation, neither David nor I were willing to agree. Mrs. Smith felt terribly guilty for her daughter's role in ruining a family. I held the downcast principal's hand and said, "Let's keep working together." I'm truly grateful for the principal, thanks to whom I found a new job. Work has been going smoothly, and life with just David and me is filled with hope. David's joyful smile touched my heart as he casually expressed, "The job you do, Mom, is really amazing. You're the mom I'm proud of." Looking at a magazine featuring my illustrations, I discreetly wiped a tear from my eye. I want to keep pursuing my career as an illustrator, but above all, I want to work even harder for my precious David.